Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of Sarastro's The Lord of the Rings painting series. In this episode, I'll be painting the soldiers and Uruk warriors from the Spreading War expansion to Fantasy Flight Games' The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. I'll be taking a similar approach to that shared in the earlier episodes to get the figures painted up nice and quickly, which means starting with a prime in black, followed with some zenithal highlights and a white dry brush to bring out the volumes and details. I'll then be using speed paints to provide all of the colours. And for the finishing touches, I'll be adding a few highlights and a bit of colour modulation to boost the non-metallic metal effects, followed with some scenic basing. Please note you can find PDF guides for several of the other figures from the Spreading War expansion over at sarastro.com. Let's jump in with the speed paints. I chose to start with the skin tone, and for all of the soldiers, I'm simply using Guilliman Flesh. You can of course use whatever range of speed paints you like for this kind of work. I also later decided to use this for the hands as well. Whether this reads as skin tone or leather gloves, I don't really mind. For the Uruk warriors, I played around with a bit more variety as there's more skin on display. For some, I used a mix of Militarum Green and Plaguebearer Flesh. I'm loosely placing the darker Militarum Green in the shadows and blending this into some Plaguebearer Flesh for the highlights. The main thing is that I just want a little tonal variation, however. I accidentally missed out the ears here, but we'll catch them later on. You can see we're able to achieve a nice wide value range with the use of semi-translucent paints over zenithal highlights like this, that won't need any further shading or highlights at all. For others, I went for a slightly more reddish look by using Guilliman Flesh, once again freely blended into some Plaguebearer Flesh. I used varying amounts of these three colours to paint all 6 of the Uruk warriors. Moving on to all of the non-metallic parts of the models, I generally like to start with a lighter tone such as Skeleton Horde. We can use this for various areas of bone, leather, fur or cloth. Notice I'm not being especially neat here. We can then go in with some heavier tones such as Snakebite Leather or Wyldwood for select areas to break things up a bit. This is Snakebite Leather, for example. Wyldwood on its own is very dark indeed, so I'll often mix it into some Skeleton Horde. The reason I like to start with the lighter tones is because we can easily then darken select areas down, whereas lightening up a dark area would involve a lot more work. For a little extra variety, I might use some Basilicanum Grey and Black Templar for some of these leather straps. Again, I find Black Templar is a little too dark and heavy on its own, so I'm first laying down some Basilicanum Grey, then mixing in some Black Templar. And I've just realised the right pauldron is also made of leather. I'm now just picking out any remaining areas of leather, sometimes taking a bit of a guess as it's not always especially clear which areas are which material. For this bit of tunic, I'm using a mix of Basilicanum Grey and Skeleton Horde, although you could certainly introduce a bit more colour here if you like. Switching over to the soldiers, I'm just using a mix of Wyldwood and Skeleton Horde for all of the leather details as well as the weapon shaft. You could really paint the inner outfit any colour you like. I decided to start with a 2-to-1 mix of Space Wolves Grey and Akhelian Green. Once dry, I then decided to brush over some Magos Purple to create a bit more tonal interest. Finally, for all of the metallic areas, I've chosen to use a pretty easy and fun non-metallic metal approach, which mostly involves a simple application of Gryph-Charger Grey. The obvious alternative here would be to use a silver metallic paint followed with some shade, as I have for previous Orc and Goblin figures from the game. I just fancied trying something different for fun, and I like how the bluish tone of the armour complements the orangey browns of the leather. Notice I'm not bothering painting details like the eyes, as I'm simply not aiming for that level of finish, but you could do if you like. These are now looking more than table ready, and there would be nothing wrong with stopping here if you wish. Otherwise, join me now for some finishing touches. The only place I've decided to take any further is the metalwork, where I'm first adding a few glinting highlights using Ivory, initially mixed with a little dark sea blue. I'm mainly just picking out a few of the high points and edges. We can use pure ivory for the brightest glints. I'm also picking out these little studs on the pauldron. And I might add a few scratches to the armour. Here I've just noticed that I neglected the ears, so I'm first painting over them with some white or ivory, then applying the skin tone on top. The other thing we can do is selectively add some additional Gryph-Charger Grey to further push the contrast. And to finish the metal off, I'm adding some touches of rusty weathering using Mars Orange, and you could use whatever orange you like for this. You could place this wherever you like, but I find it's a great way to rescue some light in the areas of shadow. You can see I'm applying this somewhat thinly and building the tone up to my liking. Notice how the simple contrast of hue between the orange rusty tones and the bluish tone of the steel really adds life and interest to the model. And I'm applying the same finishing touches to the armour and weapons on the soldiers. I'm now painting the cork rocks in grey, then providing a light dry brush, followed with some shade where I'm using both Agrax Earthshade and some Fugan Orange to add some richness. And I'm now adding some grass tufts by Gamer's Grass along with a few leaves. As usual, I like to paint the rims of the bases in black. And I'm now providing a few final highlights, before spraying the figures off camera with some ultra matte varnish. And this completes the soldiers and Uruk warriors. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. As always, you can find a full product list in the video description below, along with all of the places I can be reached on social media and on Spotify. My very special thanks go to my kind patrons for supporting this work. If you'd like to become a patron, you can find out more by hitting the Patreon link. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. Happy painting!